The period between the 1910s and the early 1960s is often called the golden age of Hollywood. It was the era of big studios, larger-than-life stars, and films that molded how America saw itself. For white audiences, it looked glamorous. But for black actors, Asian performers, and indigenous people, it was anything but golden. The same industry that crowned white actors as legends locked everyone else into roles as servants, savages, or comic relief. At its foundation, Hollywood taught the world that whiteness meant heroism and humanity, while every other identity could be mocked or erased. The racism of this era was deliberate. Blackface was treated as entertainment. Studio executives approved scripts that romanticized slavery, and actors who openly mocked entire communities were rewarded with statues, contracts, and legacy. This video will not let those awful legacies remain untouched. So, stick around as we break down old Hollywood's most racist stars. And believe me, it's worse than you think. Hit subscribe if you enjoy watching media breakdowns like this one, and let's get right into it, starting with the man who became the face of American masculinity, John Wayne. John Wayne was not just another Hollywood actor. He was the symbol of a certain kind of America. From Stagecoach to The Searchers to True Grit, his films presented him as the rugged cowboy, the fearless soldier, the ultimate defender of law, order, and country. Audiences saw him as a man of principle. Politicians praised him as a patriotic role model. Studios built his image into a brand of white masculinity that became part of American identity. But beneath that carefully crafted image was something far darker. John Wayne did not just play white dominance on screen, he actually believed in it. In a 1971 interview with Playboy magazine, Wayne made his beliefs clear with chilling honesty. "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility," he said. These were not the drunken ramblings of a man caught off guard. He spoke the words with pride and intention, fully aware of the weight they carried. He followed it by defending the theft of indigenous land, saying, "I don't feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them. They were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves." His remarks stripped away the mask of patriotism and revealed a man who openly embraced the violence of conquest and the myth of white entitlement. Wayne's racism did not exist in a vacuum. By the time he made those statements, the civil rights movement was well underway. Black communities had marched, bled, and died for equality. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X had already reshaped the national conversation. Yet Wayne planted himself firmly against progress. He ridiculed civil rights protests, opposed women's liberation, and mocked gay characters on screen. He was not lagging behind his time. He was pushing against the tide of justice with all the force his fame could give him. What makes Wayne's legacy so haunting is not just his words, but the way Hollywood rewarded him despite them. He won an Academy Award. He remained a top box office draw for decades. He was treated like a statesman of cinema, long after his bigotry was no secret. Today, his name graces the John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California. His statue still stands, and his films are still celebrated as patriotic masterpieces. Generations of Americans grew up idolizing him, unbothered with the fact that the man behind the cowboy hat openly defended white supremacy. John Wayne is often excused as a man of his time. That phrase is meant to soften the blow, as if his views were simply normal in the mid-20th century. But even in his time, his beliefs were extreme. Now, John Wayne may have embodied white supremacy with the swagger of a cowboy, but Walter Brennan carried it with the grin of a grandfather. On screen, he played the cranky but lovable old-timer, the harmless sidekick, or the wise elder whose voice audiences trusted. He won 3 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor, more than any other man in his time, and became one of the most decorated performers of Hollywood's so-called golden age. But behind the charm and the wrinkles was a man who celebrated violence against black leaders and wore his racism like a badge of honor. Crew members remembered Brennan's reaction the day Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. While the world mourned, Brennan reportedly laughed, danced, and cheered on set. The killing of a man who had dedicated his life to freedom was, to him, a reason for celebration. That moment alone speaks volumes about his character, but it was only one part of a larger pattern. Brennan was a proud supporter of the John Birch Society, a far-right group that opposed civil rights, fought desegregation, and warned of a supposed communist plot to hand America over to black people. His political views weren't whispered in private. They were broadcast openly, and he was never punished for them. Brennan's bigotry followed him to work. On sets, he used slurs casually, attacked anyone with progressive ideas, and insulted colleagues who dared to challenge the racial hierarchy. According to people who knew him, he once even recorded a racist spoken-word album designed to smear the civil rights movement. While others in Hollywood might have hidden their prejudice behind coded language or polite silence, Brennan had no interest in pretending. He was loud, proud, and unrepentant, and the industry let him get away with it. His screen persona made it all the more insidious. Audiences loved him as the goofy, bumbling sidekick, the grandfatherly figure who cracked jokes and tugged at heartstrings. Hollywood packaged his hatred inside a harmless mask and sold it as family entertainment. When he won his third Oscar, no one mentioned his political affiliations, no one talked about his open contempt for racial equality, and no one dared to ask why someone who laughed at King's death was still celebrated as a national treasure. Walter Brennan's legacy reveals the rot at the heart of old Hollywood. The industry did not just tolerate racism, it rewarded it. It allowed a man who mocked civil rights, who cheered for the death of black leaders, and who weaponized his fame against progress to become one of the most decorated actors in history. His presence in film history textbooks is still treated as an achievement of talent, while the cruelty he embodied is brushed aside as an uncomfortable detail. But those details matter. They show us that the Golden Age applauded men who used their platforms to dehumanize others. And while Walter Brennan's racism was loud and political, this next actor's racism was theatrical, staged in grease paint, and broadcast as the very foundation of modern cinema. Al Jolson. If Brennan was the grandfather of hate on set, Jolson was the man who made black mockery into a national spectacle, one that launched the sound era of Hollywood itself. In 1927, the jazz singer made history as the first feature-length talkie, a milestone celebrated in film schools and Hollywood documentaries to this day. But that historic moment was delivered through Jolson's blackface performance. He sang about Mammy in a grotesque imitation of blackness, dark paint covering his face, as audiences wept and cheered. The film is remembered as revolutionary for sound, but it was also revolutionary for how boldly it normalized ridicule as art. The sound era began with a minstrel show, and Jolson was its chosen prophet. Jolson did not stop with the jazz singer. He wore blackface repeatedly in films, on stage, and in concerts, building his entire brand around the caricature. He popularized songs written in mock dialect, performed exaggerated movements meant to parody black culture, and presented it all as entertainment for white audiences. Defenders often point out that Jolson supported black musicians behind the scenes, but that support always came after he had profited from their image. He claimed admiration for black culture, while painting himself as its impersonator. He opened doors only by holding the key in his own hand and making sure he was always the one walking through first. The damage was immense. For many white audiences, Jolson's act was their introduction to blackness, and it was a ridiculous lie. It reduced centuries of history, struggle, and creativity into buffoonery and song. For black audiences, it was humiliation writ large, a reminder that Hollywood would rather see a white man in burnt cork than an actual black actor given the dignity of a leading role. Every time Jolson took the stage in blackface, he reinforced the idea that black identity was a costume, something to be worn and discarded at will. And yet, he was worshipped. Statues of him were erected, and lots of awards were given. Obituaries hailed him as the world's greatest entertainer, carefully omitting that what he pioneered was the mass marketing of racial ridicule. Now, if Al Jolson blackened his face to build an empire, David O. Selznick used the camera to rewrite an entire history. Jolson mocked black life with song, but Selznick dressed up slavery in the Confederacy as beauty, romance, and nostalgia, selling it to the world as truth. His greatest achievement, Gone with the Wind, is still hailed as a cinematic masterpiece. But behind its sweeping shots and record-breaking box office lies one of the most dangerous lies Hollywood ever told. Gone with the Wind won 10 Academy Awards and is still ranked among the most successful films in history. To white audiences, it was a story of love and survival during a tragic war. To black audiences, it was an insult carved into film stock. The movie glorified slave owners as noble and dignified, presented the Confederacy as a victim of cruel fate, and reduced black characters to stereotypes of servitude. Even Hattie McDaniel's Oscar-winning performance as Mammy, historic as it was, came with the cruel irony that she was rewarded only for playing a loyal servant, a role reinforcing every demeaning myth about black womanhood. Selznick's fingerprints were all over the distortions. He cut out depictions of slavery's brutality, insisting they would bring unnecessary politics into the picture. He instructed his team to avoid anything that might offend Southern theater owners, which meant stripping out truth and doubling down on whitewashed fantasy. Civil rights groups at the time protested the film's content, warning that it distorted history and degraded black people. Selznick brushed them off as troublemakers, protecting his masterpiece of myth-making. For Selznick, success meant selling lies in the most beautiful packaging possible. The soaring music, the lush costumes, the unforgettable lines, all of it worked to mask the reality of slavery behind romance. What millions of viewers walked away remembering was not human cruelty, but Southern charm, and Hollywood rewarded him for it. If David O. Selznick used cinema to romanticize the past, Cecil B. DeMille used his power to control the future. Selznick glorified the Confederacy, but DeMille helped build a system that kept black actors and other minorities out of meaningful roles altogether. Known as the godfather of epic cinema, DeMille directed The Ten Commandments, Samson and Delilah, and The King of Kings. His films were massive, filled with spectacle, and praised as moral stories. But behind his reputation as a visionary, DeMille worked relentlessly to enforce a Hollywood where whiteness was the rule, and everything else was pushed aside. DeMille was not subtle about his views. He was a vocal segregationist who supported keeping races separate, both in society and on screen. His movies were filled with scenes set in Africa or the Middle East. Yet instead of casting black or Middle Eastern actors, he used white performers in brownface, painting their skin to fit his vision. Black actors, when they appeared at all, were relegated to background roles, slaves, savages, or silent extras with no chance at dignity or depth. The exclusion was not just artistic preference. DeMille actively fought against progress in the industry. He lobbied to maintain studio policies that kept casting rooms overwhelmingly white. He resisted unions that supported integration, calling them dangerous to Hollywood's future. Writers, actors, or crew members who advocated for racial equality often found themselves blacklisted if DeMille had influence over their careers. His reputation as a titan of morality on screen masked his role as an enforcer of segregation behind the scenes. His hypocrisy ran deep. While he presented himself as a man committed to biblical values, his interpretation of scripture stopped where racial justice began. He filmed stories of Moses leading slaves to freedom while ensuring real black actors were excluded from freedom in Hollywood. He directed films about salvation and dignity while denying both to those who were not white. To him, morality was fine as long as it did not disrupt the racial hierarchy that kept him in control. DeMille is still celebrated as one of the greatest filmmakers of his generation. with retrospectives and tributes praising his ambition. But his legacy is not just the grand sets or the parting of the Red Sea. It is the culture of exclusion he upheld. He made sure that when audiences thought of Hollywood epics, they imagined a whitewashed vision of the world, where people of color were either erased or shoved into the margins. The golden age of Hollywood defined how America saw itself, but it did so by silencing and distorting the lives of the people it erased. The legacies of these men are still celebrated with awards, monuments, and glowing retrospectives, while the communities they demeaned continue to carry the wounds. The excuse that they were just men of their time does not hold. Their time was filled with voices demanding justice, and they made the choice to stand against them. This deeply controversial era must be remembered for what it was, so the lies and distortions cannot stand unchallenged. These stars and producers may have carved their names into Hollywood's golden walls, but what they built was exclusion. Seeing it clearly means stripping nostalgia of its power and finally recognizing the people who were mocked, silenced, and shut out. If Hollywood was once called a dream factory, it was also a factory of lies, and exposing those lies is the first step toward truth. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who need to hear it, and hit that subscribe button for more in-depth analyses on media, culture, and history. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.